Are you ready to go off script? Let's see how the Bible challenges the roles the world has written for us.
Well, welcome back. Today we're wrapping up our off-script series on stewardship. We've looked at stewarding the earth, stewarding your body, stewarding your image, and today, stewarding your resources. We all have resources, right? Whether money, time, talents, or skills. The question is, how should we manage these resources? How does my faith affect how I steward my resources? In this episode, we conclude our series on stewardship by talking about finances, work, contentment, retirement, volunteering, industriousness, and laziness. We conclude that, as with all areas of life, we need to seek God's glory with our resources. Here now is Off Script 33, Stewarding Your Resources. Today we're talking about stewarding our resources, and to start off, as with so many subjects, creation theology is really the key foundation place, because if we think that our resources are our own and that we are to do with them whatever we like, then we're going to have one mindset. But if we look at everything as coming from God, as being in some sense derived or contingent on God's good creation, then suddenly we want to ask the question, well, what does God think about how I use whatever resources I might have, whether money, whether time, whether skills? I think in this conversation we want to focus a little bit more on the financial end, because that's kind of the more complicated out of everything. But as Christians, we don't just say, well, I want that, so I buy that. It's a little bit more to it, where we want to bring God into the equation and say, well, does God want me to have this? Or is this something that I should spend money on? Or what should I do here? So, Rose, where should we start in the Old Testament, do you think, to look at this subject?
There are many places you could jump in, but I like to start in Psalm 24, it's that psalm that talks about the King of Glory, which is Yahweh. But it starts out in verse 1 with, "The earth is the Lord's and all it contains, the world and those who dwell in it." And I believe we know this to be true, but even as dedicated Christians, we have a lot of moments when we think, yes, the earth is the Lord's, but my stuff is my stuff. As we grow deeper in God and as we understand his magnitude more and more, I think this will grow deeper in our hearts, that all that we have is really his and that we are stewards on his behalf. I've also always been challenged by some verses in 1 Chronicles 29, which is words spoken by David at the temple dedication. They're so excited with this beautiful temple that they are consecrating to God. But David realizes that even such an amazing and beautiful building that will be built to the glory of God is actually very small in comparison to God's own greatness. David says, "And now we thank you, our God, and praise your glorious name. But who am I, and what is my people, that we should be able thus to offer willingly? For all things come from you, and of your own we have given you. O Lord our God, all this abundance that we have provided for building you a house for your holy name comes from your hand and is all your own." Sean, have your kids ever made you food or made you a craft out of supplies in your own kitchen or your own closet? Something like that.
Absolutely.
I remember for Father's Day getting money from my mom to buy, which she was a stay-at-home mom, so it was really my dad's money, and just chuckling at sort of the absurdity of that. Like, oh, here's, $50, go get your dad something for Father's Day.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Isn't this his money? Shouldn't I just give him the money?
Well, in both ways. Like, one parent would give you money for the other parent.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I can speak as a father. It is still meaningful, even though you know it's your money.
Yeah.
That the kid actually made an effort. It still matters.
Right.
And I think that God feels that way when we give him attention, or we choose to spend our time or affection or resources on something that brings attention or glory to him, that it does bless his heart. Mm-hmm. And as far as God's concerned, like, whatever analogy you just used there is like 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times more, because literally every spinning electron, every neuron that somehow ends up like a lightning bolt working its way through our brain to complete a thought is really in its base level from him originally. I mean, he is the source of everything. And so there's just no way to get around that, and I'm sure he's fine with it.
Yeah.
It's just the way he set it up.
It's actually incredible in Scripture how much joy us blessing him actually gives him.
Yeah.
That he cares so much that he gets excited about it and not just like, all right, that's cute. He loves it.
I love that verse 14 where it says, "For all things come from you, and from your hand we have given you." That's the sentiment there, that we have to recognize that all resources are ultimately God's and that we are stewards as opposed to owners. And I believe that even though one might say, oh, well, that's putting yourself under a burden and you're losing your freedom to make choices and all this, I honestly think when it comes to this subject that we will have more freedom if we can somehow put a little distance between us and ownership than if we do look at ourselves as the sole proprietors of these resources, whatever they might be. And there are lots of parables and this sort of thing that Jesus talks about regarding the steward and the manager and the person who's in charge of various resources. So I think that's a helpful approach.
Yeah, and as much as it's a sentiment, I think it's also a mindset that you have to have, particularly when it comes to those times of the month when you have to pay bills or you have to budget for tithing and the various constraints that just modern life puts upon finances. Yeah. I think it's a good attitude to have and a good mindset to have.
Absolutely. And do you guys feel this way? I mean, I think our financial situations are different because of just the nature of our households, but like I bet we all feel there's never enough, and we're always like making decisions between this or that.
Yeah, for sure.
And like even if you get money somehow, just like for a birthday or
tax return,
you it's still, I don't know. It's just like in my life, I've never gotten like such a chunk of money that I was just like, woo,
yeah,
do whatever I want with this.
You're
it's always like, all right, well, this should probably go over here.
Right, it's already earmarked.
I mean, I used to feel like that when I was like really little, when I got $20, but no time recently.
Yeah. So
to feel that way again.
Yeah.
With $20.
So then the big question becomes, how do we prioritize what we decide to spend our money on and do it in a way that brings glory to God? As with the stewardship series all along, that's really the driving motivator, is doing all things to the glory of God. And I think we live in a time, and we've talked about this in a previous off script on consumerism, where there are so many forces at work to convince us to live above our means, to buy what we cannot afford, and to raise our standard of living to match what other people have.
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah. And as a result of that, we can put ourselves into bondage because, when we're in debt, then we have to pay not only what we owe, but then also interest on it, right? And then that interest can compound as well. So that's something to consider as far as this whole equation. I think there's also the whole subject of giving. Is giving important to God? We look at what the Bible says from an Old Testament perspective. For example, in Deuteronomy 15, it says to give to the poor. If among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. Take care lest there be an unworthy thought in your heart, and you say, the seventh year, the year of release is near, and your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother, and you give him nothing, and he cry to the Lord against you, and you be guilty of sin. You shall give to him freely, and your heart shall not be grudging when you give to him, because for this the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and all you undertake. For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother. So there is this ethic of abundance, or this mindset of abundance, where God's going to take care of you. This is even before they enter the land, before they possess the country of Israel. Their mindset is supposed to be, look, God's going to take care of you. He's just trained them for 40 years in the wilderness with the manna and caring for them, that they can trust in him. And look, if you trust in God, then it's a lot easier to handle our finances or our resources in a way that isn't fear-based. Because I feel like so much is fear-based. Whereas, we live in an age where you have to have insurance for everything. And even this year, they're just today, I heard they're reworking the health insurance, and they're going to find some new way to do health insurance. And then, of course, you have car insurance. And what is insurance? Insurance is like, hey, you're never going to be able to afford this situation when it goes wrong, so let's just like pay somebody else so that in the off, it's all fear-based.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say you shouldn't have insurance. That's not the position I'm taking. It just illustrates the difference between our culture and the culture God was trying to engineer with ancient Israel. And I think to whatever degree we can embrace that mindset of abundance and generosity in our own little lives, in our own little ways, that is something that really can, number one, lend to human flourishing in our own lives, and number two, testify to others that, like, hey, there is wisdom that comes from God, and it does work.
It's also freeing in the sense that if God's in control, then you don't have to be. God will provide. It says that he clothes the birds. How much more will he look after you? Not that makes us immune from money worries. Certainly not myself. I worry about it, but I also, when I do start to stress about, big expenses that are coming up or big expenses that occur, just the underlying bedrock of knowing that God is in control is comforting, and it's a freeing thought to come back to and to meditate on. You
ever think about homeless people?
Yeah.
And ask yourself, how in the world did you get to such a situation where you literally have no more safety nets left, and you're on the street, and you're dependent on whatever soup kitchens or shelters are available, or people giving you money? Like, sometimes I think about that, and in light of what I just read here in Deuteronomy, how it says that we are to have this family mindset towards our fellow believers, right? And this is something that as a pastor I've seen many times, and the way we do it in our church is very much shaped by what Jesus said, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. So we don't, like, when we help somebody financially who's in a situation where they're in dire need, we don't like bring them up on a Sunday and be like, John Smith over here is about to get booted out of his apartment, so we decided to give him $500 for his rent. Just wouldn't, but
then
this
the
sort of
balloons
thing
come down from the ceiling.
Yeah, this sort of thing does happen from time to time, and then there are some people that we support on a regular basis because of whatever situation they're in. There's just no way that that they can make it without help.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the fact that, as a family, we should, if we know somebody that is in a situation where they, sometimes it happens with like a car repair, where like you're hit with this car repair. If you can't get this car fixed now,
right?
Like, Rose, you were in this situation not too long ago, right? I've been there before. You can't get this car fixed now, you're not going to be able to go to work tomorrow.
Oh,
to make money to fix your car.
And if you don't go to work tomorrow, you can't save money to fix your car if you're not working, because then you just got fired, right? So, I mean, it really is a catch-22. So, as the family of God, like, having this mindset, it says not just like a random poor person on the side of the road, but especially with those who are part of the family of God, that we would share with each other where there is need. And I have received that myself, and I've given it. And I tell you what, it's a lot different than going to a bank and saying, hey, I need a loan, or going to the government, hey, can I get this, whatever policy in effect in my life. With a brother or sister, it's just like, it's motivated by love, and that makes all the difference in the world. And I think this is a beautiful ideal. I think also the early church did this. You look at Acts 4, Acts 3, Acts 2, that's what they did. They ended poverty among believers,
right,
by sharing their resources. And I think this is a really cool legacy among Christians that we have to fight for in every generation. Do you guys have anything else on that?
I read Psalm 119, and I always read where the psalmist says, "Oh, how I love your law." And he wasn't talking about the word of God as we think about it now, and he certainly wasn't thinking about the epistles. He was thinking about the Mosaic law. And you read things like this, and for a law that for so many people has been boiled down to a thou shalt not law, it's amazing to see all the things that God commanded instead of don't do, the things that God said do. And these things, it's our God that mandated generosity and that said, open your hand to the poor, open your hand to your brother, do these things. And I mean, there's stuff in there like if you see your neighbor's ox walking down the road, if you see the donkey, go get it, tie it up, wait for them to come. That sort of care and taking initiative to look out for them and to really call them your brother and call them your neighbor. This is why the psalmist said, oh, how I love your law. I meditated on it day and night because it was so beautiful, and because we have a God who has entrusted us with the gifts that he has given us, with our resources, with the abilities to help others. This is the kind of stewardship that he wants from us.
Yeah. And you see it in little ways too, like when somebody needs to move, God's people show up and we move that person. And it's like, that's just a little silly example where the person's either going to be totally overwhelmed and like moving for days, little trips over and over and over again, or having to hire somebody to get it done. And I've seen it countless times where the family comes together and we get it done in like a couple of hours.
And you have fun while you're doing it.
Yeah, and there is that camaraderie too. Yeah. I wonder what you guys think about lower, middle, and upper class as far as Christian stewardship. I always think of Proverbs 30, the sayings of Agur. Yeah, Rose, you like that one too, huh?
I had it highlighted right here.
This is Proverbs 30, verse 8. He says, remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me. Lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. So, I mean, that's really a God-motivated prayer. I mean, he doesn't want to be so fat and comfortable that he doesn't depend on God anymore. And he also doesn't want to be so poor that he's got to go and steal, because that dishonors God. So I just love that reasoning. It's so God-focused. But, of course, there are Christians in every economic realm. There are crazy rich Christians. There are lots of middle-class Christians. There are lots of lower-class Christians as far as economics go. But I think this is an interesting ideal to pray for.
Yeah. I've been very impacted by that verse every time I come across it. And it's the idea, I think it's a clear view of God and a clear view of yourself. You understand God's dependence and you understand your dependence on God, and then you understand God's provision for you. And that you'll walk closely, but either the lack of money or the abundance of money, neither of them is going to be a problem in your life. And hopefully you will be able to steward and help others from time to time as God enables you. Sort of being at the essentials, but being at a comfortable place might be an ideal place for many of us to serve God, where we're not constantly just trying to make ends meet, but we're not so awash in abundance that it becomes a distraction.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think of the example of having like a really expensive car. And there is a burden with that, where now you're uncomfortable to park it downtown in the city when you go out to a restaurant, because now people are going to be looking at it, or you don't want to park near the front of the grocery store. You want to park way in the back so nobody dings it with their car door when they open it. So there is like that aspect to riches. I know plenty of Christians that can steward their wealth in a way that the wealth does not own them, and they have a freedom in that. And I know plenty of poor folks that are obsessed with money, and whatever they have is still just like dominating their lives. That to just get that extra nickel, whatever it costs. And then you have plenty of folks in the middle where they're just working themselves to the bone because they bought a house that they really probably couldn't afford, or they bought a car that was just the payments were too high, and now they have to work a double time just to make ends meet. So regardless of where you're at, I mean, you really want God to be the focus. And I think you're right as far as like the poverty aspect. I mean, if you are in grinding poverty where you're only concerned every day, and there are plenty of people in this situation in the world where it's just like, how do I get my next meal?
Right.
Then yeah, it really is a lot harder to live a God-centered lifestyle.
I don't know. I'm going to push back a little bit on that. I found in my travels in Africa that people who were dirt poor, as they were in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the Republic of the Congo, that people that didn't have 2 pennies to rub together were much more dependent on God, or they seemed to be. Yeah. When we traveled over there, these people who do struggle for their next meal, I mean, they served us with great compassion and, a lot of food. I just remember feeling like, wow, these people have nothing, and look how they're treating us, who compared to them have everything, and they have to rely on God for absolutely everything. And I found myself wondering if they were better off in terms of their spiritual health than I was, because I could go to the store and get food and buy food at the drop of a hat, and I do. But they really have to depend on God.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying there. At the same time, it's a lot more justifiable to steal food if you're hungry. You know what I mean? Or if you're going to self-rationalize it. I think what you said is true, and I've seen that, not in that country, but in other countries. But I think at the same time, it is a lot easier to do things for God when you have at least the food and shelter aspect covered. You know, yet at the same time, like, we fill our lives so much that even though, like, food and shelter, like, you know what my issue with food is? It's not like, oh, can I get enough? It's like, slow down there, Captain. You know, you're eating too much. Yeah. Like, I've never had the opposite option where it's like,
am I being gluttonous? Like, is there going to be, you know, food for my family? Yeah.
This whole idea also is so socially relative. I feel like if this guy Agar saw us, he would say, oh, wow, you live so opulently.
Yeah.
It can be very socially relative. Well, he lived, many, many years BC, so no matter what, no matter how well off he was.
By default, he was.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, too, because it depends on like you said, it depends on your society. Like in some certain poor countries, everyone has a cook. Everyone has servants that wash the food or wash the clothes because hiring people is really cheap. But they don't have air conditioning. So they're sweating in 100 degrees, but somebody else is bringing them dinner cooked for them. You know, so like it really does depend on what kind of society you're in, how you would measure wealth and that sort of thing.
Talking about this reminds me of that verse in 1 Timothy where it talks about godliness being great gain when accompanied by contentment. And just that contentment portion, I think, is tied into this discussion. You know, God wants us to be content with what we have. In Philippians, Paul says that he's learned to be content in whatever circumstances he is in. He's learned the secret of being content. Philippians 4:12 says, I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me.
That's the famous Superman verse.
Yeah.
And what it really means is to be able to deal with your circumstances, not leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Right.
Let's talk about laziness for a second. It seems like there are two extremes, like just coming off the words of Agar here a second ago with like, don't make me so rich I forget you, and don't make me so poor that I dishonor you by stealing. There's also this one side where it's like, okay, well, I can live off of whatever situation someone might be in. Maybe like they're living with somebody else, or maybe they have money from somewhere that's coming in, or maybe they're on welfare and they're just like, well, my basics are covered, so I'm just going to be lazy. And then on the other side of it, you have like the Elon Musk workaholics, where they work hard and they're so industrious that they just burn the candle at both ends. And so like what does it mean to like steward our time or our energy, I guess? Like what would God want from us? And I'm not necessarily arguing for like just a middle position on everything. I think balance is good in many areas of life, but it's not necessarily always the target. So what do you guys think?
I think it could be different things for different people, what God asks for you. And we know to whom much is given, much is required. But I think that is something that we should focus on. Like I certainly struggle with that a lot in my own life. And it's not always super clear to me exactly what God would want. But I think you should come to him in prayer. And if there is ever a time when he doesn't give you a clear answer, like he's given you a head, and you know when you're honoring him, and you know when you're strung out, and you know when you're getting lazy, I think you can sense your motives, you can sense your intentions. And if God fills your life, I think you're in a good spot. If you fill your life, that's something to reevaluate.
I think in our culture, particularly here in the U.S., there's a huge emphasis placed on work and on industriousness. And there's been studies that show that Americans actually work the most out of all developed countries. I don't quite know the reasons behind that, but I think in this context, having that balance where you're not working, where you're not sacrificing time with God because you're working. And I actually find myself guilty that sometimes like I miss fellowship because I'm working. And it does affect me. It does affect my mindset. If I miss fellowship 1 week, it's important for me to get back and to spend some real quality time with God, because
you're always being nudged in a different direction.
Right, exactly. So if these things add up and it's affecting your relationship with God, you really have to evaluate that and say, hey, do I need to do something in my life where I'm cutting time out for God? Like I'm rearranging my life for God. And if it's work that's getting in the way, then yeah, I mean, that's something that you have to really take seriously.
Yeah. As far as like how hard we work, there are certainly times where it's appropriate to work extra hours or to handle ourselves in what might be in the long haul an unsustainable manner for a season. But I don't think we want to structure our lives like that on a regular basis, because we're going to get stressed out, strung out, and it's going to kill our kindness, our goodness, our gentleness, our patience, all these fruit of the Spirit. Suddenly, they're withered and falling off our spiritual trees because we're not living a balanced life, or as far as like a work-life balance goes. And then as far as laziness goes, I mean, what's the cure to that? Let's say you're talking to a friend and that friend is just like, whatever, man, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to play video games and watch TV and not do anything.
There are any number of places to go in the Bible, particularly Proverbs I'm thinking of, that addresses this topic, and going to them as a brother or sister and being loving about it and saying, hey, I noticed some things. Here's what the Bible says. I love you, and this is something that I wanted to say to you.
I think of especially somebody who, for whatever reason, isn't working. Maybe they're on disability, or maybe there's some situation where they're between jobs or whatever, and there is a tendency where, let's say, if you know that you're going to be out of work and there are some people that go from job to job, like they have a job for however many months and then they're off work until they find another job, or until they're
right. It's like a chronic thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like just part of their rhythm of the year, so to speak. And I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm just saying like there are some industries that are just like that. Like take a lot of the arts are like that, where you work a play or a show, or you do a fashion shoot, or maybe you work a movie, and then you're out of work for a little while until you find, And so in those cases, you have to find things to do. You know what I mean? And it's like, all right, well, you don't need money. Great. So don't work. But you can still work for God. You can still work for the poor. You can still do things that are a need within the body of Christ.
And in those seasons, you have an opportunity to steward your time well for God.
Yeah. Or retirement.
Yeah.
Should any of us be lucky enough to
I think our generation missed the boat a little bit.
have any kind of retirement available to us? Is retirement that moment where it's really finally all about me, and I can do whatever I want because I have this like pile of money that I've
squirreled away for 50 years
in over the years, and it's compounded. Theoretically, that's going to happen, right? And now I don't have a job. Nobody's telling me what to do. I've got an RV, and I can go wherever I want. And I can sleep in my RV.
Yeah.
Right? So like, is that from a Christian perspective an appropriate mindset?
No, I mean, I think if you look at the example of Paul or any of the apostles or Jesus, they were working for the Lord up until the time of their deaths. But I would think in retirement, I mean, you're freed up to do God's work more than at any other point in your life.
Absolutely.
So not that I'm qualified to give retirement advice, but I mean, that's the time to capitalize on and ask what you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if it's somebody between jobs, like I was saying, it doesn't have to necessarily be an age thing. It's like, all right, for whatever reason, I'm in a situation where I have surplus time and I have enough resources to be okay and covered. What do? Do I subscribe to Amazon, Netflix, Vudu, local cable, and like 2 other ones that nobody's ever heard of, and just like keep up on everything in the television world? Oh my gosh. Can you imagine?
Barf.
Or do I just get some like hobby to fill my time? Well, I think there is a case where it's like, all right, God's not an ascetic where he's like, if it feels good, you can't do it. I don't think that's the position at all.
No.
Like, I think you could travel. I think you could do things. But, like, God needs to be in there.
Yeah.
In that
consideration,
part of life.
that calculation.
Yeah, whatever, and I think of, I've seen this done well by, in particular, Sam Lance, at our church, where he has this saying, every day Saturday, right? From the time he retired, he's like, every day is Saturday for me. But even with that mindset, he's done so much that as far as helping people on their houses, fix things. I mean, put it in a hot water heater, all these different kinds of things. And I really appreciated his, and we've talked about him before and about Bud before on the show as well, and how Bud Charbonneau just like spent so much time reaching out to folks and trying to bring them into the church.
It was his job.
Yeah. And I think that those, whether you're retirement age or not, if you're in a situation where you don't need to work for whatever reason, I think you do still need to work. It's just not for money.
And it says, I don't know if it's in Genesis, but it says that God designed work to serve a purpose in a person's life. Yeah. I mean, without work, what are you, and particularly without working for God, what are you doing?
Right. And there is like this grandmother thing that I've seen a number of times in plenty of people's families, where a lot of times you have a dual income household, husband and wife both working, right? Mm-hmm. And now that's where the grandma comes in or grandpa comes in and watches the kids a couple of days a week. Yeah. And, it really makes such a big difference. And, that's just like a simple thing, but it's a life changer if you have that as a need, and then you have somebody that's willing to give in that way. As opposed to the grandparent that's just like, yeah, I'm
in Florida.
I'm over here in Las Vegas pulling slot machine levers for a quarter a piece because I don't, I've got this pile of money and I got to spend it before I die.
Right.
Which is just crazy. But, so we talked about stewarding what we have. We talked about stewarding if we have not money necessarily, but extra time. Right. So what else?
Time is money.
Yeah. So what else, Rose?
Oh, just along the lines of retirement, certainly in the people that I've seen, and then also even thinking way down the road to my own fantasy of a retirement, right? I think what you choose to fill your retirement with is a litmus test of your priorities and where your heart is. You're freed from your day job to do what's most important to you. And I think if you walk with God, and God does become the biggest thing in your life, yes, you can have fun on the side. Absolutely. Nobody's saying that you can't, and we have the kingdom to look forward to, and that will be way better than any retirement we could generate for ourselves in this life. But when you are freed from the constraints of your 9 to 5 or whatever, that's the chance to show your priorities. And if you want to, play golf all the time, like you'll be talking about it. Trust me, the retirees talk about it. You become like an evangelist of your lifestyle in retirement a lot. And if God is something to you, you might be the one who really has something to talk about when other retirees get together while they're out going to the yard sales and playing bingo and out golfing or whatever it is they do. You can be making a difference in people's lives. And I think that could be the most fulfilling of all.
Yeah, absolutely. What else do we have on the subject of stewardship and stewarding our resources?
We'd be remiss if in this discussion if we didn't talk about taxes. The Bible is very clear that you should pay your taxes. That that verse that talks about render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's. Jesus was very clear. He couldn't have been more clear that you respect your leaders and you pay your taxes, and that's just a facet of life that the Bible is clear on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's so radical about it too is that the taxes are going to a foreign occupying government.
Right.
I mean, this is like this is like telling the colonies to pay their taxes to England.
Right.
Before
As
the
they oppress you.
Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
Right. Well, things are heating up.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus is speaking only 40 years before the Revolutionary War of 70 AD, and he's like, yeah, just give it to Caesar. And Paul says the same thing in Romans 13, where he says, pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are due, revenue to whom revenue is due or is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed. So what the Christian position on taxes is, even when it's completely unjust, even when it's absolutely revolting we pay our taxes. How much more when it's
Yeah.
just like mildly corrupt?
Yeah, there can be
or
some
doing well. Yeah.
Right. There can be some controversial commands that were given to the early church in the New Testament that we can read and kind of wonder if it applies to us. And sometimes the command can be made nebulous in its application due to the culture. In this case, it's made crystal clear. If it applied in that culture, absolutely it applies in ours.
And also in the record where Jesus directed Peter to catch a fish, to pay the temple tax, that was an example not only of, hey, pay your taxes, but also, hey, God provides. Sort of a dual message there.
Well, and
if you have faith in Him.
And there was also a religious significance because Jesus points out like who pays the taxes, the son of the king or everybody else, or I don't remember exactly how he put it, but like basically he should not have been paying the temple tax. Jesus is the Messiah. He's the Son of God. They should be paying him the temple tax.
Right.
And yet he still paid it because it was like, well, so we don't offend them because it's the right thing to do in this particular situation. And that wasn't even really a political tax. That was a religious tax, a temple tax for the upkeep of the temple and for the payment of the priests who minister there.
Mm-hmm. So we've been talking about how important it is to be content, how important it is to trust God, to provide, and what a weight off that truth is when you have faith in Him. And so that sentiment is probably best distilled in Hebrews 13:5, where it says, "Keep your life free from love of money, and be content with what you have, for He has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you."
And there we put our stake in the ground. Mm-hmm. God first.
God has been incredibly generous to us, and God has gifted us with so much in the way of knowing Him, with our resources. It is an honor to steward our resources on His behalf, and I pray for all of us that we'd have great wisdom and that we would have energy and passion, and that we would be driven to do our best with the wonderful gifts that our Father has given us. I hope we challenged you. Please join the conversation, add your comments. We love hearing from you. Today I'm going to say goodbye in Lingala, which is, help me with this, Dan. What is this language?
I believe it's a mixture of French and Swahili that's spoken in the Congo. I know it's spoken in the Congo, but I'm pretty sure that it's French and Swahili.
Okay, awesome. I love fusion languages. Goodbye, guys. Tika la malamu.
Well, thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to check out the other episodes in the Stewardship series, just scroll down in the podcast feed or head on over to restitutio.org, and you can find the other episodes there. Also, Off-Script episode 6 addressed the subject of consumerism. And so if you haven't yet listened to that one and you're interested in drilling down a little bit more on the aspect of shopping and how that affects stewardship, take a look at that. And there's also an article that I wrote that goes along with that episode. Furthermore, really the best biblical theology of finance that I've ever seen was from Podcast 4. It's a rebroadcast of Craig Blomberg talking about his book, Neither Poverty Nor Riches. And as you heard in this episode, that's something that we leaned on, the words of Agur from Proverbs 30, and it really is a good catchphrase summary statement for the biblical position on finances. So take a look at podcast number 4, listen to that. You can also access that on YouTube. Just type in Craig Blomberg and finance or riches, and you'll be able to find it. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. And remember, the truth has nothing to fear.